Well, I don't know. I've had a great deal of difficulty getting this to work. Presumably we have every button I pushed went somewhere else. Um, and that's unfortunate because now all the system that has been set up is not going to work. And I don't know if anybody's here anymore. Um, and I'm going to have to change everything to see if I can get it to do what I need it to do.
The old flags are still in the loft. Are we using?
Okay, friends. I don't know if anybody, again, I don't know if anybody's here. It has been just a calamity of errors all along. Which makes me wonder if this is really supposed to happen. But I'm gonna go for it and see what we can do. Okay, so we're gonna give this a try. It's been, as I said, a real challenge to get everything to work, and now we're pretty late. So I'm hoping that it all works. I don't know. I have an assistant here. We're going to have to find out if you're able to hear. I think it'll let me do a couple of adjustments. But everything went wackily. So, all right. All right, friends. So we're going to try to do this storytelling about the ceremonial process over the last couple of weeks. And this is my first time doing it this way. And so I hope that you're can just be patient with me, and the story will unfold as it does. It may take a little while. And does that have another setting? Or is that the setting?
That's it. Are you zoomed in a little?
I did a little bit, yeah. What we need to do is to ask people if they can hear me, and have somebody on there who says hi or whatever, somebody to respond whether or not they can hear me well enough. And if not, we'll make some adjustments. Anybody there?
Several people have said hi. But,
We don't know
Jake
when.
and Brett, but we don't know who.
Keep tipping it down.
It does that, and you'll just have to look at it.
Okay. I suppose there's no way to fix it. So now I need a moment to let go of some of this stress of trying to get into position. And like I said, this is the first time I've ever tried to do this this way. And I tried several times to get the YouTube set up with the description, and everything just kept going wrong. So we had fuses blow, trying to get ready, and so on. So anyway, this is going to be sacred storytelling, and it looks like the camera is crooked, but we have to live with that. All right, how are we? So whether live or later on to view this, we just try to let ourselves get centered, oriented. I'm smudging, saging off here. I've got the sacred fire going. And this is a story about the Buffalo Nation, the Star Nation, the Sacred Hoop, and some astrological alignments and a process that unfolded. And I gave a description of it on a Facebook post. Later I'll probably try to attach that here, because what happened is as I realized how many layers were going on, that why this became something potentially beyond my personal journey, mine and several people involved. And particularly we look at it astrologically, we look at it from a spiritual perspective. So I'm going to start with a sacred song. All right, so because this is really very organic, and it's very odd for me to talk to a device instead of a group of people, in sharing a story that was really so intimate and so sacred and so expansive. So I'm going to do the best I can, and the reason that I'm pushing it now is because in our ceremonies, at the end of the 4 days, I mean, sometimes, like this one actually went on for days and days, little bits at a time. But 4 days ago, we completed this stage. And then I need to travel in a couple of days. I need to go out to a sacred site as the next step in the process. So what I'm going to try to do is just connecting to the heart of all of our non-human relatives around here, and especially to the Buffalo Nation, the Star Nations, the Bajuta Oyate. There are some plants, spirits, some herbs, and some stones that were involved, and a number of helpers. And in this case, all of them were women, which is fitting as you listen to the rest of this story about how all of this unfolded. And so I'm going to honor that. I'm going to connect to the environment around here and connect to the global heart, and to anybody who may be watching now or later, to sink into the connection to spirit, to the life around us, to the life of the planet, and to the living sky, and the magic of the dance between the living sky and Mother Earth. That's a lot of what my death vision was about. For those who don't know, just a little brief history. I went through a near-death experience, a conscious near-death experience, where I left the body, and this was at 11 years old, barely 11. I moved out of my body, and I was accompanied by a powerful spiritual being that I couldn't see, but I knew was there with me. And I was shown things that were going to be happening in the future, and many of them culminating at this time. And ways that if I could come back and to use the soul wisdom that not as an 11-year-old, but the ancient soul, the old soul wisdom, and that understanding that came with that experience, all of that experience, and teachers along the way that helped me to reconnect all of that. And so a lot of it revolves around bringing the human element to the energy of sacred sites on Mother Earth and connecting them to the sky with intentions for love and evolution, for humanity, the reconnection to Mother Earth being one of those especially, but the reconnecting to our own spiritual wisdom and knowledge. So, and along that way, I was adopted into the Dakota Lakota tradition, though what I would never claim that I have any authority to describe that tradition. I only present what I've been taught, and I also bring in knowledge from different traditions that I've also studied, such as the astrology and mythology, and the geology and the energy of the earth, geomancy, making through our relationship to Mother Earth, which is a very different perspective than the idea of people saying, I'm adjusting the energy here. Well, the earth is adjusting its energy, and we are participating. And it's through knowledge and through specific ceremony that helps us to do that. I recently came across a posting that I did so obscure that describes a relationship. I'm going to make an astrological reference between Virgo, which is connected to the high priestess, and Pisces, which is this connection to the big picture, the most spiritual and formless essence. And one is oriented to the detail, and the idea that you have to bring the details into the right position before the big picture comes into view. And the high priestess knows that. The archetypal high priestess knows that. The priestess, how to bring things into position. And that's a lot of what happened with this occurrence with the buffalo hide. So I'm going to start, and because I have very few notes, I'm just going to start and go through this chronologically. Part of the idea is I do want to share it, but it's an honoring, and I also don't want to lose details, and I may not get all the details tonight either, because as I said, this is a stranger way to do this than usual, but a way to record it than to take the time to write in detail. So in 2016, I had the opportunity to get 2 buffalo heads for the altar here on where I run Sweat Lodge. And they were the heads of these buffalo. I wanted one, the male lead and the female lead, so they could sit side by side. It's part of my vision, I think a lot of people share, is that men and women, all genders, but male, female, these energies coming into balance and existing, as men and women, shoulder to shoulder, as masculine and feminine energies working together, creating the life that we want. And I specifically asked that I be able to go to pray with those animals, to smoke the sacred pipe, the chanupa. And the response from the animals was really powerful. And in the process, the person who was setting this up, I needed to help her a great deal. And as a reward, besides the skull, she gave me a hide. But in processing the heads down from, the fur and all, from the live animal down to the skull, that was a lot of work, and also kind of a prayer of becoming one with the form that the spirit of this animal has created on Mother Earth. There's something really powerful and significant. Now, some people might find it upsetting, gruesome, or whatever to be processing it that way, to be handling it that way, but it's part of the transmutation, the transformation, and that energy needs to be fed properly, not turned away from. And I don't mean that we have to do that. Well, we should be honoring animals and their passing, their transition, for sure. But I'm just saying that larger energy, because that's involved with this ceremony as well, what I'm going to call the goddess of transmutation. An energy of breaking down and condensing and returning fertility and wisdom for the blossoming of the next form. And so anyway, that hide was salted and I never got to finish it. And now, all these years later, 8 years later, I didn't know if it was even any good anymore, and I certainly didn't feel like I was going to have a lot of time to process that hide and tan it, and doing a brain tanning process. And but an opportunity came up, and so I wanted to find out if it was still good and if it could be turned into leather. And I'm just going to tend the fire here for a second, so pause there. Okay. So what happened was there was a woman who needed to get a wing blessed and to complete it. And we were going to do that here in ceremony. And it turned out that we weren't able to do it at that time, and the idea came up that it would be much better to have buffalo hide than the leather that I had to offer. And so we went ahead and looked at, I looked at the hide because I was probably just going to have to bury it, and after all these years. And when I rehydrated it, I realized it was still good, and we quit processing. So Tiza White is her name, and I want to give her the greatest respect and honor and gratitude, because it was she who wanted to help tan this hide. Now, I, as a mentor and a spiritual advisor, but also we were working on it as equals in a platonic relationship. And something felt right about doing it like that. Again, male, female. And without that push, that incentive, that help, I probably wouldn't have done this. And as time went on, I realized that there were more and more layers to this. So it's almost like Spirit was kind of tricking me into doing this, where I was kind of thinking, well, we'll have a nice piece of leather. I have lots of other sacred objects that need to be finished off, and I have this leather that we will have processed, and I can offer it to the community. And so it began to feel like this was growing. And so my deepest gratitude to Tiza White for coming into my life. And she was involved in the beginning. We did a lot of work in the beginning, and so she was instrumental in helping make this happen. And then the part of the challenge is I did not have the brains necessary, not these brains, the buffalo brains necessary to tan the hide. So I needed to acquire those. And so there's the next connection that helped support that was Rosie Peters, who had come here. She's a new pipe carrier, and she filled her pipe here the first time, and I showed her how to do that and how to share it with the people in ceremony. And she's a Dakota woman in learning her ways, new to learning her ways. And she had found a source for a bison tail, which she needed to do a vision quest with a medicine man from a Dakota medicine man. And so she shared that source with me because, again, I was going to get the brains from an animal, but I was going to insist on going to the live animals and praying with the Chanupa and feeling the grief and honoring the fact that they are giving their life so that we can live. That is the old way. That is reciprocity. That is the source of one of the spiritual meanings that we have in our relation with the Buffalo Nation is respect. One of the 7 sacreds is respect, because that for the Dakota Lakota, these animals gave their lives for food and shelter for the people, and they needed to keep all of that in balance and make their offerings and so on. They also, for many people, the bison means the abundance and prayer. So anyway, I was able to make a contact with the people who do the slaughtering in the meat pack. Again, this is maybe a trigger warning for some, but this is part of the process. And others were not able to make it, but it seemed like to what I wanted was a woman to accompany me. I can certainly do these things myself, but it's about holding on to that principle of creating balance so that every action has a prayerful intent. And and at the same time, this awareness that, well, we're going to be creating this piece of leather that will have these prayers and intentions, and it's going to go to different people in the community, and it'll be part of our sacred objects and so on. But what I realized was that the timing of these things was aligning with these alignments in the heavens. And that's when it started to feel really profound to me that certain things were lining up that were kind of monumental from an astrological point of view. And I'm only going to touch on that a little bit to get some essence and understanding, because those were really critical pieces, and why I was beginning to feel that the ripple effect, even though it was a few individuals, and primarily me, it's mostly a solo journey at this point, but it is many people that without whom I couldn't do it. So Teaser White is one, Rosie Peters is another, and I'll mention the others as we go along. But and those alignments happen to line up with the Independence Day for the United States, the so-called birthday of the United States. And what those aspects have to do, first of all, is that July 4th, and around that time, and either side of that, and some say that the founders chose that timing because it was when the sun is aligned with the star Sirius. Now, the star Sirius is considered a powerful spiritual influence by cultures all around the world. And in the Dakota Lakota tradition, it's part of what's known as the sacred hoop. There's a sacred hoop of stars that encircles and is part of what in our Western system knows as Orion. And so there's Sirius and the twins and the Pleiades and Rigel and Procyon. And so there's a series of stars that form a circle. And in that circle is the path that the planets move across that, called the ecliptic. The sun, moon, and planets move across it. one way, and then the Milky Way dissects it to the other way. And so you have a circle of stars and these two crossings creating a medicine wheel on the sky. And what's important, there's many things that are important about that. I'm going to get to the energy of Sirius in a moment, and the other one that was highly activated. But the way that the Dakota, again, for those who don't know, the eastern tribes around here in Minnesota, but relatives to the Lakota, and their star knowledge is similar but also fits the location, because the stars and where they are in the position are connected to sacred sites on the land. And that's key. And as I said in the beginning, this is key to the work that I do. Ceremonially connecting people to the magic between earth and sky. And by making those connections, we are expanding our spiritual awareness. We are expanding our spiritual relationships beyond two-legged, or even two-legged in the tree. We're extending it to the cosmos. And when we use our consciousness, the ceremonies are important. In there I said, well, you got to have the details, and that, you create the form, and the form allows the interconnectedness to happen. It's like the chips inside the device I'm speaking to here. If it isn't arranged just right, the signal's not going to get through. So when we do ceremony, there's some things that do by intent because it's ultimately our consciousness. But it's by putting things together and creating the code here on Earth with form that allows the signal to extend to the rest of the cosmos and to other elements, like the wisdom of the trees, the wisdom of the buffalo. The story of the buffalo, that is a whole other understanding. So, in their cosmology, when the sun reached certain stars, it meant it was time to go do ceremony at a certain place. And it also had a whole story that helped inform who the people are spiritually and who they are on the land. And that goes for all of the cultures going way back. And in the Western lineage, going back beyond Greek and to Sumerian, Babylonian, a lot of these things have been passed down. And in some of these things, it's very similar. That same circle of stars, because it's so obvious, so bright. Sirius is the brightest star in the sky. And so all of these peoples honored them in a sacred way. So the United States, supposedly, they chose that time, or maybe it was coincidence. Whatever the reason, the sun aligns with the star Sirius on July 4th. And just to give a few ideas about Sirius, I'm going to cheat and use notes. So, in various spiritual and esoteric traditions, Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, is associated with spiritual enlightenment, divine knowledge, and the connection between the physical and spiritual planes. It's often seen as a source of creative energy, inspiration, and even a gateway to higher consciousness. And so it is connected to illumination and enlightenment, and it is a source of power and knowledge in many traditions. It is a gateway to higher realms. It can offer divine influence and guidance, the creative energy and abundance, and finally, it's the connection, a potential for transformation, and a connection to ancient wisdom. So all of these things are associated with that timing when the sun aligns in early July. You know, at these days it's after the 4th when it's exact, but it's all during that period. And why the 4th of July? Just because it's the United States birthday? Well, because on that same day, there was another powerful alignment. And what was happening, there were several, but the main one that is connected here is the star cluster of the Pleiades. And within the Pleiades, the main brightest star is Alcyone. And that, again, almost all over the world, they see this star cluster mythologically and spiritually, cosmologically, 7 sisters. It's a feminine energy. And on July 4th, Venus and Uranus were aligned with the Pleiades. Astrologically, a conjunction. Uranus is the awakener, brings enlightenment, it brings movement, it brings freedom from restriction. It can sometimes bring revolution, but it helps us connect to higher knowledge and specifically to our higher self. And so at the 29th degree, and for those who want to be really technical, the Alcyone, that main star, has just kind of moved into Gemini, or more correctly, Gemini has moved the earliest degree, 0 of Gemini is aligned with Alcyone, but the Pleiades spans the 29th degree of Taurus and that early degree of Gemini. So it's a cusp right now. And on July 4th, as the sun is aligning with Sirius, Venus and Uranus were conjunct the Pleiades. So that is a really powerful synchronistic alignment. And Uranus speaks to so many things, the idea of freedom. Venus, and both of them at that final degree of Taurus, Venus speaking to what do we value, what do we want to embody? You know, how is the goddess, the creator of forms, and the beauty, that beauty and love and relationship and those feminine energies. So feminine is emphasized because Alcyone and the Pleiades are a feminine energy, feminine wisdom. And Venus is about bringing that into matter. It's about the creation of forms. Classical astrology associates it with, the goddess of love and beauty, but she's much more than that. The love and beauty, and especially in Taurus, and the beauty of the earth, calls our spirit and our heart into connection. And when Uranus comes together with Venus, the connections to others are highly activated because it's connections from the higher self. And it's the love principle that is drawing us together. But in this case, on a more universal energetic level, it can symbolize bringing in, we can choose, and that's some of what I wrote about, what you really want to value. The empathy and connection to others, personal love with respect, and dignity and equality, and but the values upon which we are basing a society. And included in that is the equality of all people. And what's being emphasized here is women and the feminine, which is also part of being in a male body. It's just inward. of how we're going to embody that feminine energy. So that was very powerful, all at once. And to Alcyone is, as I said, cultures all over the world saw the Pleiades as significant. And just a few key words for Alcyone is that in the spiritual context, Alcyone is the brightest star in the Pleiades cluster and is often associated with feminine energy, inner wisdom, and the connection to higher consciousness. She is seen as a guide to intuitive knowing and the ability to speak one's truth, encouraging a deeper understanding of oneself and the world. Alcyone also represents a connection to the Pleiadian light and a vision of peaceful transformation of human consciousness. Peaceful transformation of human consciousness. So you've got the awakener that helps us connect to the higher self, to higher mind, coming in with the love principle and this feminine energy and wisdom in connection to higher consciousness. And in many ways, this with the sun in Sirius and Uranus and Venus, and that there is a balance of energy here. There is of dualities going on, but with a great emphasis on that feminine energy, which is which is the part that has been not in balance, and especially the most recent resurgence around the world of things that I'm not even going to call masculine, because it's not true masculine energy. Masculine energy protects and takes care of and does whatever is necessary to make sure that everyone is cared for. And only when it's necessary do you do some of the nonsense that we see around the world going on right now. So it is so vitally important. When I began to see these things and began to work with these in other traditions, so the Pleiades is the western gate of the sacred hoop of stars in the Dakota Lakota tradition. And the Pleiades in the Dakota Lakota tradition is connected to the center of the Black Hills, even though in the sky it's the western door. But the Black Elk's Peak is where Black Elk, in his vision, he said that I was standing in the center of the world and seeing all things connected. I'm not going to get the quote quite right. But in the center of the world is that highest peak, formerly known as Harney's Peak. But that center of the world is everywhere. The profound thing about his vision was that we can connect it to this physical place, but it is everywhere. It's where we stand, and so that we are all one. And I didn't do that justice. You got to read Black Elk Speaks and read his vision. But it's connected on the physical, on Earth, to that high peak. And that's where the ceremony was done to welcome in the thunders every spring when the sun was there at the Pleiades. So, but in the other traditions, these the Pleiades have these other. Oh, there was something else I was going to say about it. So, feminine wisdom, inner knowing, connections, spiritual guidance, visionary energy, peace and gentleness, resilience and interconnectedness. Resilience and interconnectedness. Something we so strongly need right now. So those were the astrological connections. These stars, there were 15 stars called Behenian stars that were considered to have powers that the alchemists work with. And so again, this is connected to ancestors and ancient wisdom, and how that connects in today. Well, I go back to the notion of when we use our human consciousness which connects to the whole universe, and we start making the connections, then we're creating a whole web that goes way beyond the acts of an individual. And when we do that with prayerful intent, we're amplifying the whole prayer and ceremony to the extent that we can hold that energy, we can hold those connections. So that's what I set out to do, because what was going on was that things were lining up, that the buffalo hide, as I said, Tisa helped me in the beginning to start to strip it and get the hide ready, and then to get the buffalo heads. They were coming on July 3rd, on the very day that all of this energy was lining up. And so I needed to go there, and I needed to pray with the pipe with those animals, and then to obtain, well, the heads, and then get the brains for the tanning process. So it was very important, and Rosie Peters was able to accompany me so that we had a male and a female pipe carrier. And so that journey was really quite powerful. The animals arrived the night before to the facility, and so I put pipe together then to begin the prayer with them then. So I already felt connected. And we weren't going to get there at the earliest in the morning before they started. That just wasn't quite possible. So I wanted to make sure that this prayer and energetic field was set up. Now, as we were driving down and we were chatting away, and Rosie, wonderful human who is part owner of the Brookside, a real community organizer, activist that is doing wonderful things in the town of Marine and St. Croix with poetry and with that space down there. And so we were talking about that. We were talking about connections on the land. And somewhere along the way, I felt this dread. I felt something in my first chakra and in my energy field. And for just the briefest of moments, I thought, is somebody attacking me? Because of things that had recently happened? Am I being attacked psychically? And the instant later, I knew, no. They're putting our animal down. Now, one little detail I missed is that I wanted the lead animals of the male and the female. Well, all the animals that came in that had come from Minnesota, South Dakota, which is something else that I felt was right in terms of our process, but they were all females, young females that had not had calves. They were heifers, but young, full grown, but females that had not had calves. So again, the symbology of this just begins to amplify more and more. But I felt it. And I stopped Rosie. I said, quiet for a moment. They're putting down our girl. I need with her. I could see the buffalo's head and the terror in her eye. And I could feel it in her body. And I just started singing the healing song. It's proper that we have the grief and the tears. This is what feeds the energy of transmutation and transformation as something passes. So I was with her during that transition while we were on the road. I just knew it. I could see it. I could feel it. So when we arrived, the woman who is the manager of that process at Lorentz Meats in Cannon Falls. Her name is Jill Lorentz, part of the family business. And, so she runs that, and she's been just another wonderful human being. And when we got there, I wanted to, check everything out and where things were before we got the pipes out, and did all that. And so Jill had not had any exposure. Now, Rosie had already gotten her buffalo tail. So there's already this relationship that's being built between these folks that are doing this work down there. And it turns out that they are really heart-centered. They care for these animals, but they're doing their job, but they're doing it in a good way. Temple Grandin was the one who designed their chute. Anybody who knows about Temple Grandin, she revolutionized the meat packing industry. A person with Asperger's, a high-functioning autistic person, neurodivergent, I guess to use the current term, and she understood what the animals needed. So Jill is beginning to tell the story, and when I had explained to her over the phone what I wanted and why this was such a sacred process, she took that to heart, and she had explained to her people what was going on. And so there was a native Hawaiian that works there, and the night before, he said, well, I'm going to go home and burn sage. And the next morning, when Jill kind of got the people that handle the animals together and said, these happen to be all females, but we need the dominant one. And then it'll be another time to get the male skull for me with this process. But these were the females. Again, it just fits with the energy. And it was a young woman with by Jill's description, because I didn't get to shake her hand, and I passed on a gift to her to give to her, but she volunteered. A 22-year-old woman, and she said, I want to do it. I'm going to select the dominant animal out of this herd of 50. So she tuned into that, and she was also the one to do the killing. So, and as was my perception, the animal had been killed about a half hour before, exactly in time when I felt that energy. And the head was already in the cooler. And there were still a bunch of animals there, and we were going to do the prayer ceremony for this whole process and for the animals that were alive. And I went back to kind of just tell, because I was going to come back later to get the skull, or get the head, with the idea, there was a lot of driving back and forth, that I wanted it to be cooled off because it was a hot day, July 3rd. And I touched it and got a little bit of the blood on my hand, which was also appropriate. That some of that, the life force and the blood of that animal, as we were getting ready to do ceremony. And when we walked into the barn to see the animals that remained, the two women went in first when I came in, and then they all rushed over to the other side of the pen, frightened. And again, immediately, I opened my heart field, and extended it to them. And because of the gift and the ability that I have to open my consciousness to communicate with animals, communicate with other, the non-human life forms and so on, and I opened my consciousness, I opened my heart to the animals, and I started singing that Dakota healing song. And pretty soon they stopped. They stopped crowding and being frightened. and they turned around and they started walking back towards us. In the photograph, for those of you that saw the Facebook posting, the photograph is when I finished, I snapped a picture of them. You can see they're all looking at me at that point. They're all attentive. And so again, feeling that in the heart, for these animals, we're going to give their life. And the meat is going to go to feed people. And the head is coming into us in the sacred process of all of these animals. So this was a ceremony for all of them. And as I'm standing there and they're stepping forward, again, one of them is a little bit more bold. And I heard, translated into my language or whatever. But she said, "Are you going to save us?" And I said out loud, "No, I can't save you in this form, in this life. But we are going to sing and pray, open a portal of love for your transition, and a portal of honor as you go into the next world. And so that the spirit of these animals would be accompanied through this scary period of time, but an opening into the sacred circle of life. The song that I started with is the sacred circle of life, and the sacred pipe and the circle of life. So we completed that, and then we got out on the hill, and by this time I expected Jill to want to go back to work, but she stayed with us. And so I smudged her down, and I explained what was going on and what this was about. And she was even more fascinated and interested. So I invited her into our ceremony. I didn't know she would be interested, but she was drawn into it. And I think this was also a powerful occurrence. So we've already got, that people are aware in this process something sacred is happening. And the animals are aware that they're being prayed, well, in the way that the animals understand that they're being prayed for, the spirit of the Buffalo Nation. And we had a Dakota woman and a pipe carrier of 32 years. Pipe carrier, Sundancer, vision quester. And so I explained to Jill, very briefly, the story of the white buffalo calf woman and how to handle the pipe and how it is, when it comes together, it opens a doorway, and it's akin to a blessing of communion in a Christian tradition. And so she sat with us, and we did the prayer. I loaded the chanupa, we both loaded, we sang the songs, and we're going to go back into the pen to sing with the animal, or to smoke with the animals. But by the time we got back in, they had all been taken through the chute and taken out. So while we were there doing the ceremony, they made their transition. And so it was so powerful, and the idea that there was this young 22, 23-year-old woman who was the one who decided she was going to be the one to do it, to select the dominant female and to put her down for this purpose. I felt her, I saw her, I saw that energy. She has been walking with me now for all of these days since. So we had to go back later to get the head. And in between that morning prayer, I set up all of the star sigils with the herbs. Some of them I had, some of them I went out to get. The ones particularly for Sirius, to get that day. And all the stones associated with it. And I set those up. So those were in the sun. They were in the light of the sun, in the light of the stars, in the light of the moon, over these several days of processing. And I didn't have the person who was going to help me initially to harvest the brain, but Fenella Collins, longtime friend and partner that in these spiritual endeavors, she helped, and that it all happened, and it because I was able to keep it cool. And the day that it happened, that was July 5th. And finally, on July 6th, after all these things were completed, it was time for the burial. To take the head and bury it in a sacred and ceremonial way. And that will likely, dig it up after maybe a couple of years, or however long it'll take for nature to clean it off down to a skull. But that's the way I chose to do it this time, rather than the intensive process, partly because of the heat and lack of time and so on. And it also made sense to bury it. So again, the spirit of this young female animal is with me, this buffalo. And on the day we did that, July 6th, it was a beautiful day, a little more merciful, not quite so, it was hot, but not as humid. We dug the hole. Actually, we were going to try to do it the night before after finishing getting the brains out, but just as we were getting ready, there was a thunderstorm to stop us. So again, there was this intervention. I mean, there's so many synchronicities, I'm not going to remember them all. Synchronicities that I see as Spirit saying, we're here with you. So the Joaquin Llano Yate showed up unexpectedly, out of nowhere, and there's a downpour. So we had to stop digging the hole, cover it up, put the head back in the freezer, and wait, which was appropriate, because then I did a more complete grief ritual. I do a more elaborate process for people to process their grief, but more importantly, to give the energy of our grief to that goddess of transmutation, to give it back into nature and to this spiritual energy that transmutes it, that keeps the circle going, keeps the cycle from hope into form and joy and back into grief and release and the dissolution of the form and reemergence of wisdom and fertility, and to keep that cycle going. And in our culture, we disrupt it all the time. It isn't fully processed that way. But part of that process is that you make a beauty bundle. Beauty bundle or a grief bundle. Can these objects that you are finding in nature, can you ask them if you agree? What was, the heartache that I experienced, or the connection with this person or that. And so I went around and collected all kinds of things. And they too, it included some of the herbs that are associated with these stars. So when it came time to lay the head in there, and this time the top of the head had all of its fur on, she just looked natural in the hole. And I could feel it. I could feel the expansiveness as I opened the space to release all this energy into the goddess of transmutation. And I laid the herbs in and the flowers in the part of that bundle. I can't describe to you how it felt. This whole blending, and at the same time, the connections to the stars, the connections to the plant nations, the connections to these animals, the connections to what we're going to do with that hide. Because all these elixirs that are being created during that time are going to be rubbed into the hide in ceremony. So the hide is going to contain this energy of hope and intention. The one thing I don't have is the rewrite of the preamble for the United States Constitution that I did, that contains within it a lot of prayers that a lot of people are in agreement with. And that is what was the incentive for Tiza when she read that. Tiza White is a moon dancer. I failed to say that, I think. She is a moon dancer. And so in that way is also, even though I'm years older and more experienced, there's an equality there and a balance there. But that's what drew her in, and that was the kind of energy that is part of what we're putting in. So it's not just a personal journey with me and completing something. And when you link it back to Standing Rock, when Native people stood up and the whole flippin' world paid attention. The whole world did. But the dominator energy took over again, and it's been back and forth. But ultimately, love will win. You know, as Martin Luther King says, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So we just have to keep holding that energy. So as I'm standing over this and putting my beauty bundle in the ground with this beautiful head with this young female buffalo, feeling the spirit and all that energy all at once. And as we covered it up, just then, you know, we're in the woods here, but nearby, an eagle had landed in a tree and it started calling just as we finished that ceremony. I looked at the clock and it was 2:22. These things, these little miracles that say, we are with you, we're with you. Spirit is showing up. So we had Jill at Lawrence Meets, Kirsten at Lawrence Meets, Rosie Peters, Fenella Collins, and Tiza White, who got it all going. Anyway, and me, the only male in the middle, orchestrating and doing the work. It's a powerful thing. I wanted to honor that buffalo as best I could, and right now it's on hold because I couldn't finish it all. I need to travel. And what I realized, this was another thing. It made no sense whatsoever for me to be traveling. I'm going to get some training in Oregon. And Spirit guided me very clearly, you need to drive, which is insane. I mean, it'll be fun to see some stuff. But what I realized is that in terms of the sacred group of stars and the completion of this process, or at least this stage of it, part of that sacred hoop is the twins, what we know in the Western understanding as the twins, the Gemini twins. In the Lakota cosmology, that they are twins, but they're male and female. They're a boy and a girl. And in their story, they're being chased by a bear. And fallen star, the first being that came here to Earth, came to help them and lifted up this piece of earth that is Mato Tipila in the Dakota. The colonizer name is Devil's Tower, but that I tend to refuse to use that, except that people need to know it's Mato Tipila. And it is connected to this sacred hoop of stars that is near the eastern door. Sirius is not quite there, but this is near the eastern door. So the Pleiades in the western door, Matotipilok in the eastern door, and the sun travels across that from May 20th until about July 13, 14, 15 when it's in Gemini or in the twins. And so in the Dakota tradition, they say, Lakota tradition, they say when the sun is in Matotipila, it is time for Sundance. So they would traditionally go to that butte, that volcanic butte, and they would do Sundance. Well, I'm driving there on Saturday. Hopefully I get to leave Saturday the 12th so that I can do my ceremony there as part of this whole process. And then I'll be traveling on to Oregon to get some training and some health techniques, and then traveling back. And then later, there's some other star alignments, because the next stage for completing this brain tanning will be completed at that time. So I don't know if anybody listened live. Hopefully some people will listen later, but I told the story out here in nature. Thank you very much. We give you thanks. Give thanks to the Buffalo Nation, to the Star Nations, to the Plant Nations, and to the Gem Nations. And by connecting our consciousness through all of those layers, we're holding an energy field here. And I hope you would join me in holding that prayer for this enlightenment and embodiment of feminine wisdom and creation of a better world together. Hamatakilas. We don't know how to end it.
Is that exit?
Maybe.